Can a 44 special beat a 10 millimeter in a penetration test? So what I'm comparing today is our Elmer Keith 44 special loads to some hand-loaded 10 millimeter loads. Both of these are hard cast bullets sent over to the channel by one of my Patreon supporters, Hillbilly Scholars. So thank you for sending those. So our 44 special, that uses the 429-421 Keith bullet. That is a 245 grain mold, and these actually weigh out to 240 grains. Just because they are a hard cast bullet. So that's the Keith bullet, and we're loaded up with 17 grains of accurate number 9 powder, which is a replication of the old Keith load, which was pretty much getting close to 44 Magnum before 44 Magnum existed. And at the time, way back in the day, it was the most powerful handgun cartridge that existed. So 17 grains of that powder, and those have been pressure tested a whole bunch of times by different people, and they come out to about 25,000 psi. So I'm going to test those through my 4 1/4 inch Smith & Wesson Model 69 and 44 Magnum. This should go without saying. Don't load these up and fire them in a Charter Arms Bulldog. I don't think it would necessarily blow it up, but it just wouldn't be a good idea. And to compare that, I loaded up some 10 millimeter that he sent over, those bullets, and those are a truncated cone, 200 grain 10 millimeter, and I loaded those up with 12.5 grains of the accurate number 9 powder. So this should be an interesting test. I am going to use my Smith & Wesson Model 610 with a 4-inch barrel to compare that to the 44 special, so we can get a nice even playing field between 10 millimeter and the Keith load 44 special. So this should be very interesting. I am going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test, and this is my real world simulation test with all these shots. 4 layers of sweatshirt material. I know it's redundant, but I like to stay consistent from test to test. Followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs, and then more clear ballistics. So clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh. So anything you see in here would be about half that deep in an actual living target. So this should be really fun and interesting to see how 44 special compares to 10 millimeter. And then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, so here's our warm 10 millimeter loads, our truncated cone, 200 grain hard cast. I did test these in the past. I did 11.8 grains of accurate number 9. That was the max charge listed by the current books. The older books show 12.5 grains, so that's why I'm doing that today. 12.5 grains of the accurate number 9. So let's see what we get here with our 10 millimeter auto 200 grain through the revolver here. 1150, 1152, 1135, 1110, 1093. I suspect a little bit of bullet creep, and there is just a little bit. So I could do a little bit better on those crimps. I did crimp them pretty harshly, but being lead bullets, they can slip out, not having a revolver roll crimp. Do one more here. 1106. So not bad velocity overall. Not really much of an increase over my 11.8 grain loads, but still pretty consistent. Now here is the one we're here for today. Be honest. Our Keith loads. 17 grains of accurate number 9. This is a replication of the old Keith load before 44 Magnum was a thing. So let's see what we get here. 240 grain bullet. 1061. 1068. 997. 995, 1003. So not super consistent towards the end there, but for being a 240 grain 44 special, that's not bad power. So I don't think it quite hit the energy of that 10 millimeter, but there's a lot more bullet mass here. So let's see how this does in our ballistic shell test. All right, so I'm going to do a couple of shots of each cartridge. 10 millimeter, 200 grain truncated cone. Pretty powerful. So I'll do just 2 shots of each cartridge and go take a look. So I put up our fleece bullet backstop just in case these go through. So here's our 10 millimeter. All right, let me hit it one more time. Let's go take a look. All right, those did pretty good. There's a lot of damage right here, and that's from tumbling. A ton of tumbling damage there. And it looks like they didn't really start to tumble until about 11, 12 inches. Pull up this rib simulation here. There's the back side of it. They appear to be going in straight with no tumbling right away, so that's good. And we have some really good penetration for what it is. Our first round here, and these both went in a straight line even though they did tumble a little bit. Our first one here went to about, I'll give it 25 inches. Sometimes parallax will throw that off and look a little bit different position to where I'm putting my finger. And our second one, I'll say 28.5 inches. So that's not bad overall considering that they are going through rib simulation and all of that. So let's try our Elmer Keith load. This is the original load designed for hunting big game, really, out of a handgun. And let's see how that does. All right, we got our Keith load with our Keith bullet loaded about 1,000 feet per second out of this barrel, so not bad. Let's see how this does. Our first shot. All right. Now let's hit it another time. Let's go take a look. All right, I'm going to try to go right in the middle there and see if we can get a repeated result. Let's go take a look. All right, so we got kind of in the middle there, which isn't a bad thing because that splits the difference of what we were seeing. That first one went all the way through, and I don't even see if that's in that bullet backstop or not. I can't tell. But yeah, our first one, I should say, the first one is this one. That one just barely went through the rib simulation. And we can see these two 10 millimeters. I believe that's both of them are tumbling through. These two 44s are tumbling through, but that one shot of 44 was not tumbling through. So it could just be, you know, my test is a little bit unique with these rib simulations. You know, most people don't use that, so it could just be an effect of my rib simulations that causes that. But what we got through our first one was we passed through 35 inches of gel and a ½ inch of MDF, which is pretty impressive. Or our second shot, I should say. Our first shot, we went to about 22.25, which isn't that much. And then our next shot here went just a hair further than our further 10 millimeter. We're at about 28.75. So looking at this, you know, the one consistent thing I can see though, just looking in this gel, is that both of the 10 millimeters went to about 11, 12 inches and consistently tumbled. As we're with the 44s, while this one I think tumbled, the other two you can see the track that's going straight in a straight line. So it just seems like the truncated cone 10 millimeter, which is kind of a design you need for typical semi-auto. you know, you can have some of these issues where they want to tumble, but with that semi-wad cutter, you can see from the tracks, we don't hit those tumbling issues. And you would see that right there. And a normal person that doesn't understand gel and everything, they'll be like, look at all that damage. It's so powerful, but really that's just from tumbling. This is a tumbling effect. That's what I'm looking at, as I'm seeing a little bit more consistently straight lines with the 44, which I do like. So I would say penetration wise, these both are pretty equal, honestly. You know, that lower penetrating 10 millimeter beat that one, but then this 44 passed all the way through, and then this 44 is pretty similar to the penetration of that other 10 millimeter. So I'm going to say they're pretty evenly matched for penetration. But if I had to look at one of these for stopping a dangerous animal, I would think that the 44 would be just a little more effective, because it is a larger bullet. It's going to cut a larger hole, and it's going to tear a little bit better rather than tumble. So I would say the Keith load and 10 millimeter are pretty well matched. They seem pretty good overall. So let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at these bullets. Then I'm going to shoot a steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets. And before I show these, I want to say I think that the bullet that I actually intended to stop at this backstop actually went through it, because there's a hole right there through the tape, and lined up kind of on the back side of it, there's ballistics gel coming out. So that could really only happen from one thing happening. That bullet passed through this fleece, which is got to be 20 layers there, the way it's rolled up. So that bullet has a lot of penetration when it is orienting straight. A lot. But because, you know, it's a long bullet, you know, it has a chance of tumbling, and that's what we saw happen. We saw some tumbling, which will limit its penetration. But if it's tumbling, it's going to do a whole bunch of damage going that way too, because while these are 240 grain, they're the length of like a 250 grain, typical 250 grain, because they are a hard cast. So going through that way, that's, you know, over a 3/4 inch hole. So either way, it's pretty impressive. So looking at our 10 millimeters here, very nicely cast bullets. Just overall great performance with these 10 millimeter rounds. What I did like about them was they were very consistent with the performance we saw. A little bit difference in penetration, but not so much of a huge difference there. So very consistent. And also we saw when I was first chronographing them, very, very accurate. And before we got bullet creep, very consistent velocity spreads. So not a bad choice right there for that bullet and that powder charge, especially have a semi-auto where we're not going to get that bullet creep out like we saw out of a revolver. Now our 44s, just very impressive bullets here. Very nicely cast bullets, very hard. We didn't have any deformation on those noses, even though we were hitting some very impressive power. So just not bad overall. And everything looks pretty good here. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 25 yards from the target. So I just want to fire off these rounds as fast as I think I can hit that target from 25 yards. And to me, that's the best way to simulate maybe a dangerous animal charging, because that's 25 yards, but it would approach quickly, and maybe it wouldn't be that big. But, you know, I'm just trying to do the best I can with trying to simulate that. I've actually had people tell me that I need to set up an elaborate system of a pulley system and have a target pulled at me. And it's like, I'm not going to hire people to come out here and pull stuff. Just trying to hit the target at 25 yards as fast as I can. I think that's good enough for me. So 10 millimeter. See how fast I can hit the target from 25 yards. So just getting a quick front sight picture. Those actually shoot pretty good. They're pretty much point of aim for me. They shoot good. The recoil wasn't that bad. You know, I saw a little bit of muzzle rise, but the actual recoil, you know, wasn't that bad. So 44 special Keith loads. See how these things do. You know, I think that first one I pulled it over the target a little bit. I'm just transitioning from that revolver to this revolver that has a little bit different trigger pull. But the rest of those shots, I pretty much aim center mass. It looks like some of them are kind of high, and you know, some of them are to the left, and that would indicate me just jerking the trigger a little bit. But overall, not bad. I don't like that I missed one, but not bad overall. So one of the big problems I had with the other 44 loads I loaded were that they're moving so slow that at distance they're actually shooting high, because I was getting a little recoil before the bullet actually would leave the muzzle, because some of those loads I loaded were at like 700 feet per second. So this should have taken care of the problem at this point, where they're going to leave the muzzle before all that happens, and maybe they'll be a little more accurate at distance. So I'm going to back up to 75 yards and see how these do. All right, 75 yards from the target, our hunting simulation here, and I would say this is kind of relevant in a way, because those Keith loads were used for hunting for a long time, and it's reported that even at 100 yards, these 44 special Keith loads will go clean through an elk. So yeah, it's kind of relevant to look at them that way. So I'm just going to do some single action shooting here, hunting simulation, just kind of see how these things shoot. So let's see how our 10 millimeter does at 75 yards. I'm going to aim center mass and see where they go. I don't know where that went. I believe that may be going high. Low? Yeah, I think they're going low. Because I was aiming a little bit low, thinking they were shooting over the target, but apparently they were going too low. So I'll try a few more rounds. I'm just going to load them in here singly without the moon clip. And I'll have to aim a little bit high, so let's see if I can do a little bit better now. So I don't know. I think at this point it almost seems like it's just inconsistent for me, because I'm just not seeing anything that was very consistent with that load at that distance. So I'll try our Keith load, see if I can do any better with this. I don't know where they're going, because I'm aiming center mass. I'm feeling pretty confident today. Huh. All right, so that time I aimed below the target. So I think they're still going high at these velocities. And it looks like they're going to the left. So I'll try to aim a little low, a little right. Still having problems. I'm not doing so well today at all. Just a few more rounds here. All right, let me try a little bit harder to aim. I just can't tell where they're going to be able to adjust. Alright, so that time I aimed below the target by a couple feet. Alright, so yeah, I had to aim below the target by 2 to 3 feet. Wow, that thing is blowing my glove apart. Got a lot of backblast on that. So, interesting loads overall. So, you know, I'm looking at this scientifically. You know, I'm not like disappointed, my favorite cartridge lost or won or whatever. You know, the question was, will these Keith loads significantly out penetrate a 10 millimeter? And I was thinking they would, but the answer is they don't. That being said, I would say there is a potential they could, because I did get a pass through. You could call it there and say, well, yeah, it did beat it, but being the inconsistent penetration I got here, it's hard to call that. What I can say is I think it penetrated as far as a 10 millimeter, and 10 millimeters are known to penetrate really far. So in that aspect, it's not bad. But I was thinking I was going to get like 44 Magnum level penetration, and we're just not quite there with that with the 44 Special. But that being said, that's plenty of penetration, because even if you look at, 25 inches, that's still maybe 2.5 feet through a living target, because the rib simulation kind of changes that a little bit. So that's still pretty good penetration. If you could penetrate, this deep into something, you're going to have enough penetration to stop, a typical large bear or something like that. So it's not bad overall. So it is a pretty nice round overall, the Keith load, but it's just a little bit below my expectations of what I thought it was going to be. But that being said, still really good. And these 10 millimeter loads are pretty good too. They functioned really well in this revolver, which is not always typical. Sometimes I get weird things where they creep out and then it just wants to lock the thing up. But these did pretty well overall. So again, thank you to Hillbilly Scholar for sending over these bullets to do this test with. And if there's any bullet that would really show the maximum potential, it's these, being hard cast and very consistent. And also, he sent over the data to be able to load these up, and then I did a bunch more research. So just fun project overall. So thank you again to Hillbilly Scholar, and that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.